Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Big Ideas with Sayed. Big Ideas is now available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcast, SoundCloud, YouTube, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castro, Castbox, and Podchaser. Please follow us on Twitter at Big Ideas with SS and also find our page on Facebook and Instagram at Big Ideas with Sayed. Please don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. And if you have any comment or observation, please don't hesitate to share with us so we can improve the quality of your favorite podcast. Thank you.
Our guest for today is a final year MBBS student at the Ahmad Hayatu University, Zaria. He is currently studying the comparative assessment of health outcomes and financial risk protection among beneficiaries and non-beneficiaries of the Nigerian Health Insurance Scheme, which is the NHIS. Ahmad Hayatu, welcome to the house today.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. Actually, Ahmad is actually one of my major influences for starting this podcast because I went to visit him some time back in October 2017, and we were actually discussing about, I think it was existentialism and essentialism. It was a very, very interesting conversation. And we just felt that such discourse should be exposed to a lot more people and a lot more, I think, audience. Can you remember that day?
Yes, very well, I do. It was in Zaria. You and some friends came to visit, I think a couple of months ago. And we had a very engaging discussion about some philosophical topics, historical, and even, I think, current issues.
Yeah, fair enough.
Of importance. I was an engaging discussion because, at least, if anything, this podcast is the result of...
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, to be honest, thanks. You have to thank Ahmad for that. And I think I met Ahmad, around 2007, because we went to the same secondary school, New Horizons College, Mina. And actually, one of my earliest memories of Ahmad, if I remember correctly, is when our first term results came out. Ahmad is actually very, very smart. He came third, but funny enough, he was crying in tears for why would he come third. He should have actually come first. I remember that time my result was actually, I think I came 29th or so. I was way down there. I was like, this guy actually is what? He's crazy. He's mad. Why is he crying for coming third? Do you remember?
Of course I do.
I just feel like you hate losing.
No, well, at that time, yes, I would say, because what formed my idea of success was different. But now I don't think of my successes or failures in terms of any comparison with anyone. They're just based on other stuff, more important things.
Fair enough. I think that we've gone down something on the memory lane. Let's get down to the topic. Ahmad, are we blank slates? The idea of Tabula Rasa. Don't get us wrong, please. It's not the Brimo album Tabula Rasa. No, it's the actual idea. So are we blank slates? Or what is Tabula Rasa anyway?
Well, for us to answer that question, I think we have to first of all understand what the concept is. The term tabula rasa is a Latin word which is usually translated into blank slate. However, that is just an approximate translation, if I may use approximate. The actual translation is not blank slate. It means the erased slate.
Erased slate?
Yes.
What slate?
A slate before the invention of paper by using papyrus in Egypt, people used to write on slates, and they coated these slates with wax. So when they wanted to write something new, they had to melt the wax, and that erased the writing on the wax, and that was why the Latin translation is tabula rasa.
Also an erased slate.
Yes.
So you have a blank slate or an erased slate to actually write something new on.
Yes.
Yeah, fair enough.
But Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the greatest philologists, I think he's one of a philosopher.
The German philosopher,
yes,
right?
The German philosopher.
The 19th and 20th century.
Yes. He died 1900. He actually translated tabula rasa as meaning to make room for something new. That was his translation. And I think that's more accurate to characterize tabula rasa not as a blank slate, but as an erased slate.
We are talking in such vague terms, So I think the idea of tabula rasa, I think it has some historical context from the time of Socrates and Aristotle or so?
Yes, well, the term itself, tabula rasa, was never used by any of those philosophers, although the attribution is first to Aristotle in his work, De Anima, which is a work that he wrote on the soul. He discussed the idea of how the mind comes to know knowledge, how we acquire knowledge, and in that work, he talks about the mind being, in his word, he actually used grammation, which was translated by Albertus Magnus to mean blank slate. However, as I said, that translation is not entirely accurate because even Nietzsche agrees that it's better to use the word, to use the term erase slate and not blank slate.
So, I mean, is it in terms of human beings, society, or what exactly are they trying to explore?
Well, it's from a branch of philosophy known as epistemology, which is the study of knowledge. And what they're trying to do is to determine how we acquire knowledge and how we come to know things. Do we come to know things by our experiences, or do we already have innate ideas that are built into us? And so that was a point of contention, because having innate ideas form part of our knowledge base, or deriving our knowledge entirely from our experiences, would mean that human nature would be different. And so the implications of knowing the source of knowledge or the sources of knowledge is of importance in determining what human nature is.
I mean, fair enough. So is there an idea of whether, as a human being, are you predetermined from God, or your environment actually shapes you?
Yes, well,
roughly speaking.
Yes.
I mean, as a 21st century young adult, I actually think it's actually both ways, There are some things that are predetermined by nature, but the environment remains a huge factor.
Well, it's true that, but you see, in the idea has had a very long history, a very long intellectual history. So if we're talking about Aristotle, that was Aristotle's idea.
Okay.
After Aristotle, Ibn Sina added flesh to the idea.
The Islamic philosopher, right?
Yes.
Of the 12th century?
Yes. So Ibn Sina, in Ibn Sina's work, he discusses the mind as empty, or also as a blank slate. But then he argues that we come to know stuff, we come to know knowledge based on what he calls deductive reasoning. That is, we're able to, in the course of our interactions with our environment, we're able to form universals through our deductive reasoning. So we're able to understand or to form universal concepts based on specific experiences. So that is to say, when we come in contact with something, we only come in contact with very few things. But from those few things, we're able to derive knowledge of greater things. And so that is his own, I think, expression of what tabula rasa is. It's the syllogistic method of learning.
Okay. Then going further, I mean, that's 12th century. So the other philosophers actually built on that idea as well?
Yes. Many others, including St. Thomas Aquinas, Ibn Tufail, who was also, he wrote a novel which he explored the concept of a child that grew up in a desert island. And even Thomas Aquinas also used that because he's one of the greatest Christian theologians to have ever lived. And it's the concept has a recurrent theme, and it continues to occur even till this day in the works of, say,
Steven Pinker.
Yes,
in his book, I think the Blank Slates, the modern denial of human nature, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but I think another person that's important to the concept is John Locke.
Yes. Well, I think John Locke's idea is the most revolutionary in that case, because the idea has not been significantly altered since the time of Aristotle, except by Zeno and some Stoic philosophers. But a radical change in the idea of tabula rasa was made by John Locke in his essay concerning human understanding, where he divides our source of knowledge. He actually didn't use the term tabula rasa. He used the fact or the term that the mind is like a white paper. This is not to say, in his own idea, the mind is not formless.
Okay.
The mind is not formless. Rather, we come to know we come to have knowledge about our environment or about things generally through two means. One is what he calls the environmental exposure, which we all agree on. And then the other is he agrees that while the mind is not blank, but it is blank of ideas. That is to say, even though we might have some things on our mind when we are born, those things are not ideas. And for him, ideas are what form
what fills the mind.
Yes, what we come to derive from our experiences.
What John Locke actually argues is like the mind has like a structure, a shape, a programming. It's not up to your environment to fill that void.
Well, yes, to a certain extent. But what he's saying is that there are no innate ideas.
Okay.
There might be other things in the mind. That the mind is not formless. It might be blank, but it's not formless.
Okay.
So we might come to know things through our environment and also through some things in our mind, but he does not refer to them as ideas.
Okay.
Because it's very important to make this distinction between the blank slate and the innate and the concept of innate ideas.
Innate ideas, fair enough. Of course, there's an argument, but I think with in the modern day, I think Pinker has done the much work in the sector, where he takes the argument from Aristotle up to the point of John Locke and 20th century philosophers. And I think with Pinker as an experimental psychologist, he explores the idea in its relevance to human behavior as of today.
As I think Pinker talks about the idea quite all right, but I think if we're to give credit, someone who has done great justice to the issue, I think, is Noam Chomsky.
Fair enough.
Yes, because Noam Chomsky talks about he was not, the concept of innatism is not his own, because people like Descartes have already argued for innate ideas in the past. However, what he has done in his field, which is linguistics, is to make it a concrete concept. So for him, the mind is organized into what he refers to as modules. These modules are independent clusters that are able to take information and then process them to make cognitive outputs. And one of those modules is language, is what he calls the faculty of language. And in his own, what's known as Chomskyan linguistics, language has two properties. One is generative, and the other is recursive.
Okay. What are those two?
When we say language is generative, what that means is that we are able to take a finite set of words. We have a definite vocabulary. We have a limited number of words and a limited number of rules which we can use in language, in speaking. And yet, we are able to express ideas without any limits, without any bounds. And that's what's known as generative.
Okay, fair enough. I think that's to Chomsky, right?
Yes.
I mean, it explores the idea, but again, how is it relevant to human behavior as of today in 2020? That concept, how does it shape us? How does it determine what we do or how we think?
Well, it's very relevant because in his argument, in Chomsky's argument, the language faculty is what coordinates everything our minds do. Whatever our mind does is based on
the language
faculty.
So I think, does Chomsky argue, for example, if a language doesn't afford for certain kind of ideas, a person that only speaks that language cannot explore ideas beyond what the language allows?
Well, there's that limitation to the theory, because if we take the idea of innatism or innate ideas, what that means is that there are definitely going to be sharp limits on what humans can express. That is, there are going to be limits on human knowledge.
Fair enough.
And that is what he's...
I want to explore the language angle of this. For example, for a pure Hausa speaker, there are no Hausa words for things like nihilism or essentialism. Does that mean for a pure Hausa speaker, it's almost practically impossible for him to explore those areas of philosophy? Or what exactly?
No, I don't think... You see, the thing is, what we say is superficial. That is just one aspect of language.
Expression.
Yes. Because what we think far more than we actually say. And that's what's important in understanding the innate ideas that I'm talking about, is not what we say that is actually of any consequence, but what we actually think. And that's what's most important, is for us to get to the bottom of how we think, because it's language that affords us this very unique and yet universal capacity.
Fair enough.
For extraordinary thought.
Yeah, so I mean, if you think about language as well, sometimes we think things that we can't actually say. For us to express and develop those ideas, we actually need the language. So once a language has those limitations, let me say, allow me to express such ideas, it doesn't allow me to actually expose my ideas to my guests, right? I think it's along the lines of Chomsky's argument, or I'm wrong.
No, it's correct. Because if the mind consists of innate modules or clusters, what that means is that there are some things that we can't understand. And this is very evident. So, for example, historically, we've made significant progress in technology. For example, we have in all areas of technology. So, when you look at the advances in transportation, telecommunication, etc., you find that we are constantly making advances, and now we're moving into artificial intelligence, brain-machine interfaces, quantum computing, etc. However, there are some questions that have remained in the obscurity that they've always been since antiquity. Take, say, something like, what is human nature? What is the source of our actions? What is, what does it mean at the core to be human? What does it mean when we say we are human? What does it mean? These are questions that we've been asking for a very long time. And yet, there has not been any significant improvement on the question. And take, for example, things like chess. You and I are very good at speaking. In fact, a 3-year-old that has grown up, even without any formal education, is able to express himself and to do this very eloquently. A 3-year-old can speak fluently and express his ideas. However, when you take things such as chess, very few people ever get to be very good at chess. And so I think part of the idea is the reason why most of us are able to express ourselves using language creatively and to do this freely is because it falls within the sphere or within the spectrum of what we can do.
Fair enough.
However, games or activities that are designed at the fringes of human capacity become exceedingly difficult for us.
So I think that's, in layman terms, anyone can learn to speak, but very few guys can be, let me say, scientist or physicist or quantum analyst.
No, I think that's not exactly the point, because that's different. What I'm talking about here is just the basic creativity. So, for example, is the first fact is correct. Yes, all of us can speak, but then there are things that all of us can't do. For example, now, no physicist, no biologist, no scientist can give you the answer to those questions that I've said, like, what does it mean to be human? What is human nature? What's the source of our actions?
Fair enough. It's like there are things that are beyond the human capacity, not even different human beings, but human race,
not just individuals, but so the entire race.
Back to the issue of ability. Of course, almost everyone can learn a language, but very few of us can actually be good poets or good writers as well, So for those kind of people, is it like their slate has that programming, or how it doesn't relate to the idea?
What someone comes to be is going to be dependent definitely on, first of all, an inherent nature. But it's also going to be dependent on the environment
as well
in which one grows up in. So if someone who has a sharp mind, let me just use that term, grows up in an environment which does not facilitate his talents, he's not likely going to be a great scientist because his environment is stifling.
Fair enough.
However, if you change the environment, he's more likely going to be better at what he does. But there's also a third factor. So, for example, now, the bees, they do build their hives. Yes.
Yeah. Hives.
Yeah. So, when you look at it, why do they build them? Why do they always build them in hexagonal shape, for example? Why? Why not some other shape? You see, it's not a product of genetics, and it's not a product of environment. is what Chomsky calls a third factor, which is a modulating factor. And so there's always innate capacities, there's an environmental influence, and of course there are other modulating factors that which we may not know about.
Fair enough. I think with animal behavior, I think from different species you see different kind of behaviors. I mean, like the bees, like you mentioned earlier, they build their hives. Like the birds build their nests, Other animals, like some calves, from 1 day old they can walk. We see, the human child, it has one of the longest dependency time, I think, of all animal species in the world. And there's actually very little a child can learn on its own without the influence of the mother or the environment. Then back to the idea of the blank slate, does it mean to an extent like the human slate is actually, let's say, can I use the word, more blank than other slates of other animals, or?
No, I don't think so. Well, the thing is, for us to know what it means to be different from animals, we have to have a human nature. The word has been used, or the term has been used loosely to mean all those unique and yet universal traits that make us human. However, I think the reason why humans have such a long dependence, latent period before they're actually able to exist independently, has to do with evolution, with the evolutionary biology, and not with the state
nature
of the mind. Yes.
Okay, with evolutionary biology, in what sense?
So, for example, we're able to compensate. Humans are able to live in societies, highly organized societies with laws, with rules and regulations. Although that doesn't mean all those rules will be
perfect.
followed.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yes. However, and that's one of the things I think Yuval Noah Harari argues quite rightly in his work, *Sapiens: A Brief History of the 21st Century*.
Cool. A brief history of humankind.
Of human race. He talks about that one of the things that makes the human species successful is the ability to form large, sophisticated communities. And I think that is correct to a certain extent.
It's because you live with the humans. I mean,
yes.
You can have ants organize themselves in long marches and gather food together, but to be so complex and so developed, humans are alone.
When animals do all those things, they do them for survival. And they're able to do this within a certain limit.
And a defined task.
Yes, a defined task. Whereas humans are able to do this with a greater range of freedom, and they're able to do this over time and then even improve upon it. Whereas what ants used to do 10,000 years ago is still what they do today.
Fair enough. So the human being is the only one that's able to show that kind of progress and development from its, let me say, evolutionary ancestors, But how or why did the human make that leap?
Well, that's a very important question. And this brings me back to the idea of Chomskyan linguistics. It's because what Chomsky argues is that the language faculty has what he calls the properties that I mentioned, namely they are generative and recursive. So he divides language into two. There's what he calls language in a narrow sense and language in a broad sense.
Okay.
Language in a narrow sense is the fact that we're able to speak almost indefinitely with a set of defined words and rules. That is why. So, for example, now what's known as recursive is to be when one is able to apply an outcome to an input. So, for example, if I say 0 plus 2, that's 2. So I can say 2 plus 2, that's 4. 4 plus 2, that's 6. This means it's recursive.
Okay.
Then there's language in a broad sense, which has two components. What's known as the perception and articulatory sense. That is, we're able to use our ears to listen, our eyes to see, and then process these ideas and express them. So we see the words on the page, we read, we internalize, and then we're able to express those ideas. That's perception and articulation. So if you see, one thing is, animals are able to perceive and articulate. So, for example, bees are able to perceive that there's nectar, and then dance. Yes, and through that dance, they're able to communicate the location of food to other members of their species. Ants do this. Okay. Birds do this. Also, dolphins do this using their sonar. You see, they're all able to communicate. They are all able to perceive and articulate. But they are not able to do this on an infinite scale as we're able to.
So for
they
you,
can only
the
communicate.
bees is for food, and it's a dance in that figure 8 shape, and that's it.
Yes.
And they're not able to, let me say, make the dance move to a figure 16 or 32 shape. It's still at that 8
Yes.
level. Similar with the dolphins. So remember that the only ones that are able to make that leap. Is it because of our IQ or our brains or our diet, or how are we able to, let me say, be the only species that evolved so radically from, let me say, what you call the generic animal nature?
Well, there's a lot of contention about this. Some argue that a change, a genetic mutation must have occurred, which is transmissible to offspring, and yet that afforded us the capacity for language. So, like Chomsky argues that one of in his own argument, it's that genetic mutation. But then there's the argument that possibly is not due to any genetic mutation or any social construction, but rather due to a modulating factor. And that modulating factor is not known.
It's not known.
Modulating
Well,
factor
do you have any theories or any?
I think we've spoken about
fair enough.
the theories.
I think so.
Unless,
I mean, we can just give a quick recap. But I mean, either with the human. I mean, so it's not like how we behave the way we behave. For example, there are some people, like you can see twins. For example, one is calm, one is, let me say, very angry, very aggressive. And it's highly likely they are twins. They have a similar genetic makeup. So what are the factors in this change in, let me say, in all these variants in their behavior? If you say they are blank slates, I mean, they should have similar behavior if it's all due to the environment, but they're expressing this different kind of behaviors.
You see, this is one of the. Personally, I don't subscribe to the blank slate theory because I believe that they are innate ideas. Because if we're blank slates from the outset, what that would mean is that our behavior is going to be directly related to our environmental or
genetic factors.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, both.
Well, okay.
So that would mean that if there were no innate ideas, I can only express the ideas that I've
been exposed to.
that have been exposed to. So I can only talk about things I have seen or things I have heard about. I can only repeat.
Fair enough. For example, so like babies actually know to cry. No one teaches them how to cry. They are afraid of the dark. So it's more like they actually come with that kind of programming.
So there's a programming. Whereas in the blank slate theory, ideas are not in the human mind.
But I think,
but there's the argument is overwhelmingly against.
For the theories that argue for the blank slate, you can say like those are not actually ideas. They are more of expressions, and it's actually different from the idea of the blank slate, because the blank slate actually focus on ideas and their development, or like expressions. And let me see what innate human behavior.
No, but then let's look at language again. For example, so if, for example, a child, when you look at what the child is able to do, and compare it with the data that he has been exposed to, you notice that there's a difference. So, for example, a child might learn only 10 words, and yet he's able to make sentences that no one has ever said in his presence before. He's able to express ideas that he has never had been expressed before. So how is the child able to express ideas that he never had and he was never exposed to?
Fair enough.
So that means that there's to account for the gap that exists between the relatively scattered and degenerate data that the child is exposed to and the rather rich, complex and creative expression or output which is able to accomplish. That means there has to be a schematism, an innate schematism in the mind of the child which is able to cover up that gap.
Fair
and
enough.
As far as I can see, that's the only explanation.
I think it's quite a solid argument. So it's up to those that subscribe to the idea of the blank slate to come up with the counter argument for that. But again, it also means the idea of noble savage. The idea that the human being actually, at first, I mean, we're living in societies where we're just mostly hunters, eating raw meat. We have to make that progress, start being farmers, and up to the point where you can actually wear clothes and move in technology. How did the noble savage actually make that movement?
Well, there are many. So, for example, people have let me just say at this point that the study of human nature depends on it's multidisciplinary study. It's an interdisciplinary study.
So philosophy,
it's a
psychology,
transdisciplinary study,
evolution,
yes. So,
biology, and so it depends on where you're taking it from.
Yes.
Chemistry, physics as well.
It depends
different
on
arguments.
So anthropology, evolutionary biology, genetics, philosophy, etc. And so many people. So the line of argument one takes is going to depend on one's field. And I think to approach human nature from strictly from these artificially constructed academic disciplines is to be highly reductive. And I don't have the knowledge to conduct
fair enough. I get
an
that,
interdisciplinary
but the
study.
issue is mostly I think almost globally all scientists agree on this fields, but at least we attempt to answer these questions from different fields. So for example, there are some things that genetic study will point to you that psychology will not give you, and there are some things that psychology will give you that philosophy will not give you, and different disciplines as well all try to answer those questions as we move forward. But one thing we can agree on all upon is that the progress is tremendous, So like in the last 10,000 years, the leap that the human race have actually made, it's crazy. It hasn't actually happened anywhere in history or amongst any species. If you can even isolate it from, like, let's say, the scientific revolution 500 years ago, then the industrial revolution, and now we're in the AI era. You can see this
information age.
So it's kind of exponential leap again. So does it come to us from, let me say, was it ingrained in our slates, or it was a behavior we learned? Or how do you manifest?
I think it's a product of both. However, if we didn't have those innate ideas to begin with, we would not have been able to harness our environments to the point that we've attained today.
Fair enough. So those innate traits, are they peculiar to humans, or maybe some other animals might actually make the leap we've made?
Well,
we don't know.
If we are to define human nature, we'd notice that, of course, human nature has to be something universal and yet unique to humans. And it's a highly contested issue to this day. It's a highly even in academic disciplines and in social sciences, in psychology, anthropology, in many disciplines, including philosophy. However, I have read quite, I think I might say substantially on the issue, but I don't think there's anyone who can give a coherent and substantial argument to what entirely human nature is. We can only see bits of it from these theories that we've made.
Fair enough.
And I think in currently there's no better argument or no better proof of the innatism of human nature than from Chomsky's ideas. I think
fair enough. Fair enough. I mean, he's the latest actually among all those ones. I mean, 100 years in the future, maybe some people might actually improve on Chomsky's work. I mean, that's the thing about knowledge. It's always growing. But with the human, actually, what actually led to that spark? I mean, so actually, I think Homo sapiens in our form, I think we've been around for over, I mean, the average is 10,000 to like probably 20,000 years. I mean, in our own form, I think mostly from, let's say, 500 years ago till like 10,000 years ago, the human state was basically similar or the same. But at the point we made that leap, what sparked that leap? What environmental factor led to that leap? Let's say from the from the scientific revolution, Of course, work of like people like Ibn Sina in the 12th century and earlier philosophers, but the actual growth or progress, we can say, is roughly 500, 600 years ago.
Well, there are many. It depends on there's an evolutionary leap, which we can say occurred about 10,000 years ago. But then there are other. So I don't know. I don't know what leap you're talking. Do you mean the scientific revolution?
Yes, scientific revolution.
Okay.
So I mean,
the scientific revolution actually is of historical interest, because anyone who wants to study anything that is of consequence would know that the scientific revolution was very important for many reasons, because it led to a radical change in consciousness. And many factors came into play. One, of course, was the oppression by the church. That was what they call the Dark Ages, then before the Renaissance. So that was one of the issues. However,
I think the church was stifling down on knowledge, or what? Dark Ages, or
well, during the Dark Ages, it was prohibited for anyone to say anything that went against the canonical school. So, for example, someone in England could not say anything that was against the Anglican Church. If you were in Germany, you couldn't say anything against the Roman Catholic Church. So, someone like
earlier scientists,
let's say Aristotle. Aristotle had Galileo had to convince the aristocrats for them to fund his studies, because he was trying to study the motions of very abstract objects like a ball rolling down an inclined plane. And it didn't make sense to any of them. Why should one study something that is highly abstract instead of studying something like, say, the motion of leaves?
How can we grow more crops in that way?
The motion of leaves, the motion of plants, etc. And so it took a lot of hard work for people to break away from those constraints.
I mean, if you look at like most of the earlier scholars, Newton, Galileo, they actually came away from the church, So was there something in the church that actually helped, their course of study? People like the guy that worked on genetics, what's his name again? Gregor Mendel, a lot of them, Nietzsche, a lot of them had a lot of alliance with the church, Was there something in the church that actually encouraged learning? Even also earlier Islamic scholars like Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd, a lot of them, So you have this, religious background to them. Was there anything about religion that, sparked that on?
No, I don't think so. You can't make these because there are two different things.
Okay.
Islam and Christianity have very different approaches to knowledge. The epistemology is very different. So when you look at the Christian era, you see that, or the West, you see that the time of the greatest or the most radical change in science was when scientists actually broke away from the church. So even Newton didn't was not a believer in Trinity. He didn't believe in Trinity. So you see, most of them, you'd find that there's that element of dissent against the church. Whereas if you look at the Islamic societies, you see that there's a very high correlation between the period of greatest scientific knowledge or acquisition or transformation and the point at which they had religious backing. So there are two different things, because the caliphates that came actually sponsored many during the Islamic Golden Age. They had what they know as Baitul Hikmah, known as the House of Wisdom. And some argue that it was not actually a house of wisdom. Some say it's just a metaphorical, just used as a metaphor. But whatever, there was definitely a period that was known as Islamic Golden Age. And that was a time when the caliphs and very rich people were sponsoring scientists to do very extraordinary things. And so there's a great divergence between the two religions.
Fair enough. But I think we can see the scientific revolution and the Renaissance period is actually what gave rise to the Industrial Revolution, that gave rise to our age. I can actually say it is when the scientists broke away from the church. And this actually led to, the most concrete arguments of atheism started to be made, from the likes of Nietzsche and the likes of Darwin,
yes,
for example.
Those arguments, when looked at from that historical point, make sense at a superficial level. But when you look at it deeply, the stifling of the pursuit of knowledge or knowledge of science was not in the name of religion per se. It was done in the name of religion. However, it was done for political purposes.
So, the politician wanted to control the people, so they used the church as a means to an end.
It was for political reasons, and not because Christianity in itself
stifles education.
Yes.
It doesn't. It's more of a political tool.
Or any religion for that matter. It's not because of the religion itself, but because of the bastardization of the religion. And you can use anything to control people, religion or atheism. Anything.
Well, I think the beauty is not in the story, it's getting people to actually believe the story. So once you get a lot of people to believe in an idea, you can get them to act in any way you want them to act upon. Yeah, but we see the rise in atheism, literally. I think in Harvard in 2017, I believe, the number of self-acclaimed atheists was higher than all the religions combined, So So yeah, we're seeing this shift, let me say, globally in the intellectual era, where a lot of people are actually saying they are atheists, is this like, are we trying to go back to the era of us being blank slates, or the environment is still a factor here?
No, I don't. Well, there are many things that. First of
agree.
all, being atheist now is just fashion. It's
trendy.
yes, it's trendy. So for some people, that's all they need. That's all they need. Whereas some people actually see religion as a stifling factor, as something which constrains their rights. As something that prevents human development. And this is, I think, due to a wrong attribution to what religion is. So
so you can see.
So in my opinion, I think there are many factors that have led to the rise of atheism. One of them is the fact that it's trendy. One is, I think, the failure of religious leaders and the failure of religious people to express not just religiosity but spirituality.
Spirituality, fair enough. You made a distinction. Spirituality and religion. So what do you mean by the difference then?
Religiosity is holding on to those practices.
So the dogma.
No, not necessarily dogma, but just doing the
rituals.
The rituals. So praying, going to church, fasting. That's religiosity.
Sacrifice. That's
yes,
religious.
But spirituality is doing it with a sense of depth, with knowledge of the purpose of why we're doing what we're doing. And there's a very big distinction between the two. And I think most people are religious and not spiritual.
I think it's the absence of spirituality that has not led us to
atheism. Yes, because there's a lot of once spirituality is lacking from religion, it's definitely going to lead to confusion.
So it's missing an element. So it's not just in the practice. Actually, let me say the feeling behind the practice or the experience one can derive from it. I think it's evident. I think we've spoken quite a lot, But this 2020, there are a lot of more things in technology. We have AI, machine learning, all that stuff. So are we going to see a shift in that human behavior, or our blank slate actually going to have a different composition going into the future?
Well, there's a movement which is called transhumanism. It's a philosophical, political, and intellectual movement that began with known as Professor FM 2030. He renamed himself to Professor FM 2030. And I think what transhumanists actually want to do is they are arguing for a radical change in what a human is using biotransformative technologies. So using technologies such as brain-machine interface, such as mind uploading. They want to make a better version of
the human.
I think that's this poses both an ethical as well as, I think a philosophical challenge.
Fair enough. I think it's what Yuval calls Homo Deus, the human of the future, So I think there's an experiment that was done in California, and I've forgotten which journalists went to the lab. So it's such that you can actually feel things you don't feel before and act in a way you don't actually necessarily want to act. So I think it was actually first done with rats. So you actually trick a rat not to love cheese, but to actually love poison. And you actually genuinely look forward to eating poison. And it doesn't feel coerced. Actually, you trick the mind. Because, I think our mind is mostly, the brain works with hormones, So if you can trick, so it's mostly like what you feel is not mostly happiness or joy. It's your different hormones levels. So I think serotonin as the other one, I can't actually remember the name. So it's different hormones levels that actually play. So once you can tweak them in a different way, you can actually play with the human mind, or let me say any animal mind. Then does that mean, again, our innate nature itself was as a result of the balance of those hormones, not necessarily, let me say, or God or destiny?
Well, there's a chemical basis or a chemical model for emotions. There is that. However, the study of human nature is at a point where we can only speak based on theories. That is to say, the sophistication of our understanding of human nature has not gotten to the point where we can point with certainty to these concrete scientific or neurobiological basis of what human nature is. At this point in time, there is no we can't say
don't
for
have
sure
enough
what the
evidence.
neurobiochemical basis of human
What I'm
nature
saying
is.
is we know for sure. I mean, once you play with those hormones, we get different reactions and thus different behavior. So let's say, theoretically speaking, if let's say 10,000 years ago we had an entire different, let's say, chemical composition, will have been different human beings as of today.
Well, the change is because a change in one input leads to a change in an output. That's true. But then you can't say for sure that it's only that change that matters.
So it's multivariate.
Yes. So for example, we know, of course, that if, for example, I read hard, I'm likely going to pass my exams. But that doesn't mean everyone who reads hard is going to pass.
The exam.
Neither does it mean that anyone who doesn't read is going to fail. So you see that the many variables have to be taken into account.
So it's not
and
a
that's what
simplistic argument.
the interdisciplinary study does, is that it brings arguments from different fields, from different aspects of knowledge to form a concrete theory.
Argument. I mean,
argument.
I think that's why I have to give this man credit. I think you all know Harari. I think in his work, actually, he did a good, even though he's a historian, he approaches it from a historical perspective, but I think he did well in trying to draw arguments from anthropology, evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology, and different fields into try to make his argument for the human of the future. Again, I mean, we're looking to the future, so I think science can answer the questions, or let me say, things that are physics, But again, those ethical questions still in our minds, and what can answer them to us, Since we're getting to a point where people are questioning religion, what else can answer this? Can we, from ethics, from science, or how can we do it?
Well, first of all, we have to begin with the realization that whatever we do, some people are going to have very different opinions. And some people there have been atheists for thousands of years. Atheists have been in existence for thousands of years. However, we have to come to the recognition that science cannot answer all the questions. We have to begin there because the science itself is a method. It's only a method that we use to arrive at new knowledge or to improve upon existing knowledge. And so that method has its limitations. And by extension, if the method has its limitations, that would mean that the knowledge that is derivable from the application of that method is going to have its limitations.
So it just covers a particular part, a particular section of the pie.
So while science can answer some of the questions quite superbly well, science can only answer very simple questions. So, for example, science tells us about, say, gravity. We know gravity. These are very simple issues when you compare them to human interactions. And that's why we're able to formulate theories in physics, in chemistry, in biology. But it's very difficult to do this in social sciences. And very often when we do, they very often break down. So when it takes, for example, Karl Marx's idea of human nature, he does not believe in an idea of innate human nature. He believes that human nature is formed by our institutions. When you take, and this is derived from, of course, Friedrich Hegel's idea, which is known as the Hegelian dialectic. So when you look at these arguments in the social sciences or in the humanities, although they are called theories, they don't stand the test of time.
They don't.
Because human interaction is so complex and so broad that science can't answer those questions.
I think, fair enough. I think a lot of time has actually gone. We can keep speaking for like days and not actually reach to the bottom of the question. I mean, I think since time of Aristotle, the question have been asked, are we blank slates? And we're not any closer to finding the answer, but we've explored the question a lot broader as well. Thank you, Ahmad, for your time. So, any closing words for our listener about the idea, how he can actually take the idea and make better choices of himself or his behavior or his interaction or her interaction?
Oh, yes. One is, first of all, I won't pretend to give any simple formula as to how one ought to live one's life in these few minutes. However, what I would say is that humans, that my own conception of human nature is not that we are that we are good or bad, because some people have made those arguments in the past. My conception of human nature is that what makes us human, universally and uniquely, is the fact that we're able to change within ourselves and also to change our environments in a way that no other being is able to do. And I think this is what we should capitalize on, regardless of what our opinions might be on what human nature is. We should never forget the fact that we have the capacity to make change possible.
All right, thank you very much, Ahmad, for your time. It was great talking to you. And it's a wrap. How about you? Keep on going.